On Primetime Politics tonight, the federal government advises Canadians against all non-essential travel as concern mounts over the spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 and cases continue to spike. I'll speak with this health expert about the latest efforts to flatten the wave. And MPs will be here to debate the latest pandemic measures from the government and whether more is needed. And the Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations joins me to discuss the $40 billion commitment for compensation and reform of the First Nations child welfare system. But we begin tonight with a new official travel advisory from the federal government just as we enter the busy holiday season. Canadians, even fully vaccinated Canadians, are being urged to drop any non-essential international travel for the next 4 weeks in an effort to block the rapid transmission of the Omicron variant of COVID-19.
We are bringing in a travel advisory that will mean a lot of people will choose to cancel travel plans during the holidays. But it also is a clear indication of how seriously we take this new variant and the situation we're in.
To those who were planning to travel, I say very clearly, now is not the time to travel. The rapid spread of the Omicron variant on a global scale makes us fear the worst for Canadians that may think of traveling. Traveling Canadians could contract the virus or get stranded abroad.
I think this week there's a pivot towards domestic response because we now know that the virus is in our community and much of our public health resources have to focus on that. At the same time, the federal government, being responsible for the international border, is still considering layer on more protection. So you heard one of them today in terms of advising against non-essential travel. And I think that there's other measures being under active discussion at this point.
The federal government is also ramping up its testing at airports and ramping up shipments of rapid tests to the provinces, which until now have been slow, most of them, to make the tests easily available or affordable. And more provinces are speeding up the eligibility for booster shots. All of this on a day when Quebec reported almost 2,400 new infections, the highest daily number since last January, and Ontario reported more than 1,800 new infections, the highest daily count since May. Let's bring in three members of Parliament to discuss the government's new travel advisory and whether it is the right move. Arif Virani is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade. Stephen Ellis is the Deputy Health Critic for the official opposition Conservatives. And Don Davies is the Health Critic for the NDP. Thank you for your time tonight, gentlemen. Mr. Virani, let me start with you. The travel advisory issued today, what is the objective? Omicron's in Canada, will continue to be spread. So is this about stopping spread, or is it more about not being called upon in a few weeks to rescue Canadians who might be stranded outside the country?
Well, I think, Peter, what this is using the tools that we have in our toolbox at the federal level to control the spread of Omicron as best we can. Yes, it is in this country as it is in many countries around the planet. We appreciate that. We know, however, this is the Christmas season. We know the Canadians have been excellent in terms of following public health guidelines, keeping distance, exercising proper hygiene, getting vaccinated, etc. What we know also is that many people are looking forward to reuniting with loved ones and taking rest and relaxation trips potentially abroad. And what we're indicating quite clearly with this travel advisory is that we do not think that is a good idea, and we're encouraging people not to undertake non-essential travel to foreign destinations.
Then why don't you ban it?
Ban all travel?
Well, why don't you tell advising Canadians, like, you've still left the choice with Canadians. Why not tell Canadians we're not allowing this travel to take place? Tell the airlines it's not going to happen.
So we've taken serious steps over the course of these 22 months, and we'll take the steps that are necessary. But what we're doing, Peter, at this stage is advising Canadians that this variant is very virulent. It spreads very rapidly. It's on an exponential curve, much more so than the Delta. And what we're trying to avoid is a situation where people, against our best advice, go abroad and then perhaps find themselves in a situation where they don't know what the situation is going to be like in that country of destination, and that they may, in fact, have trouble returning to this country.
All right, Stephen
Ellis,
what
we're trying to avoid.
Stephen Ellis, you're a medical doctor. Do you believe the call for Canadians to abandon all non-essential foreign travel right now and over the next 4 weeks, is that the right call and an effective measure?
I think the big thing that we understand here is that, in contrast to what the opposite member said, Omicron is very transmissible. We don't know what its virulence is at the current time. We also aren't entirely certain how well it responds to the vaccines that we have. We are expecting that it's going to respond to the third dose. I think the difficulty that we have at the current time is that we know that we have to learn how to live with Omicron and the rest of the variants that are to come. It's the uncertainty that the government is creating for Canadians and the lack of hope going forward that is creating divisive politics here in Canada. We need a firm plan from this government. We also need to have Canadians understand how we're going to live with COVID-19 in the coming weeks and months.
But to be clear, so is the ban a right idea? Is the ban the wrong idea? And some would suggest, look, I mean, the government argument is, look, there's a measure of prudence here until we, buy some time to see exactly how Omicron works, what the effect might be on hospitals. But you're saying we don't need this this travel advisory now?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I think that what we need is some certainty here from this government to help us understand what exactly is happening. All we have is a piecemeal approach. Every time a new variant of concern comes on board, we have a different approach, and that is not allowing Canadians to plan their lives. Again, from our perspective, it's important that Canadians have an understanding that COVID is here to stay for the foreseeable future. So how do we live our lives? How do we plan for that? How do we make sure that things like the ArriveCan app are working so that Canadians who fulfill all the criteria, that they've had 2 or 3 doses of vaccines, that they've had 3 negative tests, that they've filled out their appropriate paperwork, that they know that they don't have to quarantine and isolate, and they can get back safely into Canada. That's our expectation, that there's a plan here.
Okay. Don Davies, what's your reaction to this travel advisory today?
Well, Peter, I thought you asked a penetrating question right off the beginning that I didn't hear any good answer from my Liberal colleague on, which is, this is not a ban that they announced today. This is a suggestion. And, on the one hand, if Liberals say this is a variant of extreme virulence or certainly transmissibility and of great concern, why are they only suggesting to Canadians that they not take non-essential travel? In addition to that, there's a huge gaping inconsistency, whereas Canadians are being asked not to take non-essential travel. But we're keeping our borders open so that citizens of other countries, say Americans, can pour into Canada for non-essential travel. How does that keep us safe? So when Liberals say they're doing everything that they can and they're using every tool in the toolbox, that is demonstrably false. I would have expected today, if they really believe that we need to take strong action, they would have said there is a ban on non-essential travel like we had before in this country, and we are putting a ban on non-essential travel of foreign nationals into Canada.
Let me pick up on that.
That is not happening.
Yeah, we were going to go there anyway. Mr. Virani, what is the answer to that? Why are Canadians being told not to travel, but we're not telling other countries in the world, we don't want you coming to Canada?
Well, let me step back a bit here, because first of all, in response to Dr. Ellis, I respect his background as a medical professional, and I respect the service that he's done to his community and to this country in that regard. But I'll also respect him as a man of science, and the science is dynamic on this. So to indicate it's been a piecemeal approach or it's been cobbled together is betraying the actual science. As the science evolves, our response evolves. That's the way it's been for the last 22 months. That's the way it will be as we go forward. What we're doing is taking a prudent decision, a cautious decision to impose a travel advisory as we've done in the past. An outright ban is a very significant step, which we've done in very specific instances, such as when we banned travel into the country from India and Pakistan when there was extreme cases of Delta originating from those countries. Right. Could such steps be happening in the future? It is entirely possible. With respect to what Don Davies had indicated, he's asking about what we're doing vis-a-vis the American border. Your viewers should understand that all of the quarantine measures and health protocols that were in place yesterday remain in place today. So we are taking precautions with respect to people that enter the country vis-a-vis the testing procedures that are required prior to arrival, and also the quarantine requirements that are required after arrival.
All right, Dr. Ellis, let me have you respond to that, if you will. That, again, this is the suggestion here is that there is prudence, but also talk to, I mean, the notion of piecemeal. To Mr. Davies' point, that we're telling Canadians that we don't want them traveling, but all kinds of people will be coming here over the holidays from other countries.
As I said, what Canadians would like here is some type of certainty. This is not now a new virus. This is 22 months old, almost 2 years into this pandemic. And again, this government continues to put plans in place that I have to say are piecemeal. in the sense that, this is a new variant of concern. What are we going to do? Canadians don't know what to expect from this government. And again, to have other things like the ArriveCan app that just does not work, that doesn't have any consistency in terms of when people are triply vaccinated, when they have triple negative tests, that they still can't return to their own country. I think that that is unconscionable, and that is the type of certainty that Canadians are looking for here. Are we going to, every time there's a variant of concern, are we just going to close our borders? Is that the idea? Well, that didn't work with Delta. Is it working with Omicron? It's not working. So the question is why are we not deploying more rapid tests? Why we've been asking for rapid tests since the election has happened. That was part of our platform. That is still, again, another piecemeal approach that is not being rolled out very well.
Let me quickly pivot to that and the rapid test issue, Mr. Davies. Where government's spending $1.7 billion in the fiscal update to buy more rapid tests. The suggestion is some provinces have been slow at rolling them out. Now all the provinces seem to want to roll them out. But how's that been handled?
Well, all we can do, I think, is judge it by the bottom line. And what I hear from constituents and Canadians all over the country is they can't get them. And I think that's the problem. And I don't think Canadians appreciate the finger pointing. All I hear from the feds is that, well, it's the province's fault. And I don't know what the provinces are saying. It depends on the province. The bottom line is that I think we do need to get a lot of rapid tests out into our community because I think they play a valuable role. I also think that we need to accelerate the availability of boosters. Again, the Liberal government is saying there's enough boosters around, but I got my second shot in June. I'm 6 months away, and I don't have an appointment for my booster shot. I think that with Omicron, one thing we know is that third shot is going to be critical to try to give people some immunity while we're sorting out what happens. So I think we should be pulling out all the stops to get boosters out immediately to everybody that needs them. And we need to start dealing with the health workers. I mean, they're tired, they're burnt out, and we need to face that because I'm really worried that we're going to face a crisis in our hospitals.
Lots of questions that we'll get a chance to canvass in the days ahead, but I want to thank you all for your time tonight, and still lots more to discuss on this topic at another point, but I appreciate your time. Take care, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The premiers of Ontario and Alberta also took steps to fight Omicron today. Alberta is expanding access to rapid tests, and Ontario is expanding access to booster shots, and also reimposing capacity limits of 50% on major venues.
All I'm saying, our best defense is get a booster shot. Locking ourselves down out of this isn't the solution. What the solution is making sure everyone goes out and gets a booster shot in every corner of this province. And that's our plan, and that's what we're going to get done.
There's been enormous stress and strain, division in families and communities and organizations. And if there's one small thing we can do that takes away another reason for division, about families arguing, about having the unvaccinated aunt over for Christmas dinner, for example. If we can instead put that decision back to individual families, how they can be COVID careful, they can use rapid testing, for example. If they're having family gatherings, there are other measures that they can take. Those rapid tests are now more widely available as well. So we think that it's appropriate at this time to go to where the rest of Canada is, all 9 other provinces, and permit limited socializing regardless of people's vaccination status.
Well, let's follow up on the new travel measures introduced by the federal government today. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist and associate professor at the University of Ottawa. He's a frequent guest on CPAC and is with me again this evening. Professor Deonandan, first of all, good to see you again. Thanks for your time again. What are your thoughts on the federal government's advisory issued today? Now, they've reposted their advisory against all non-essential international travel for the next 4 weeks. What do you think of that?
It has to be done. It's not going to solve the problem in and of itself, but it's going to help a little bit. Our goal here is to slow transmission as much as possible, to buy time to vaccinate and get other tools in position. So non-essential travel is a source of importation of Omicron infection. Anytime we can prevent that from happening, it's a good idea.
How big of a source is it? I'm hearing some of that today, competing sort of thoughts and opinions about whether this is a big source of spread for COVID-19 or not.
Well, 100% of new cases prior to the existence of Omicron in Canada were due to travel. So that's how it arrived here. Now it's already here, so it's spreading. And the argument is, well, why bolt the barn doors after the horses have fled? However, numbers matter. We don't want to increase the number of imported cases that can serve as point sources for further outbreaks. So in my opinion, anything we can do to slow that growth, even though this might not be a high impact policy, it's probably worthwhile doing.
Again, this is a travel advisory. It is not a travel ban. So it leaves the choice at this point to individuals to follow the government advice or not. How confident are you that this will work and that people will follow that advisory?
I think they will follow it. I think there's enough fear right now and understanding of how explosively contagious this disease is, because we've got 2 years of experience already in other kinds of variants that weren't quite as contagious. So most people will follow it. And hopefully the travel industry gets on board and acts responsibly and makes its own internal policies as well. We live in a liberal democracy, so we have to shy away from making hard restrictions as much as we can and rely as much as we can on individual choice and responsible behavior. There may come a time when the heavy hand of the law has to intervene, but I don't think we're there yet.
What more should we be doing?
We got to deploy the best tools we have. And the good news here is that we know how to control this disease. We do it through N95 masks because COVID is airborne. We do it through ventilation improvement, MERV and HEPA filters. We do it through rapid testing and symptom checks. And we do it through vaccination. Vaccination remains our best path out of this, finally. So this is a wake-up call to those who've not been vaccinated yet to get vaccinated as soon as possible, and for the rest of us to line up for our booster shots.
We've talked a bit about travel, setting that aside for a moment. What about gatherings over the holidays? What's your advice?
My advice is be responsible. Do not gather unnecessarily. I'm not going to tell people what to do about their personal life. If you need to see your family, you need to see your family. But try not to spread infection. If you're going to gather, do so with fully vaccinated people. Do so outdoors if you can. If you can't, then make sure there's good ventilation present. Invest in something called a Corsi-Rosenthal box. Google that. It's a thing you can make at home to lower the risk. And use rapid testing to high effectiveness. If you don't have to gather, don't gather. But if you're going to gather, do it safely.
Now, let's talk about, like, we're hearing a lot just in the last even 48 hours, more and more discussion around rapid testing and the need to ramp that up. More and more provinces are now expanding the distribution of rapid tests, but who gets them still seems a little uneven across the country. Some people forced to pay, some are not. Are the rapid tests an even more important tool now with Omicron, and what's the key to making them as effective as possible?
Ooh, big questions there. This is probably the most underutilized tool in our toolbox. And by this point of the pandemic, they should be ubiquitously used. In fact, had they been used during the times of Alpha and Delta, we probably would have a much easier go of it by now. So everyone should have access, and the access should be free in my mind, because as expenses go, this has a huge return on investment, and that is keeping society open and functioning. We could use rapid testing to shorten the length of isolation for exposed people. That's going to be a big concern as more and more people become exposed, more so than ever before. Then we can't be taking large numbers of people out of the workforce simply because they have an exposure alert. So rapid testing can help shorten that path. It has to come with an education campaign so people know how to use the test accordingly and what a negative result means. It doesn't mean you're not infected. It means you're not infectious at that moment.
Okay, and what's the difference so that people understand?
Well, it's possible to be infected but have such a low viral load that you're not infecting other people yet. So if you test positive on a rapid test, you're probably infected and infectious. If you test negative, you're probably okay to be socializing. But if you test tomorrow, you might be positive because the virus has had more time now to incubate and to replicate more.
Okay. Yesterday's fiscal update, the government promised to spend $1.7 billion more to expand the rapid test supplies and get them to the provinces. And yet we know the federal government's already shipped some 80 million rapid tests to the provinces. Only about 15 million or so have been deployed. So as much as provinces are starting to ramp up the distribution, have they been too slow until now to deploy those rapid tests?
Oh, in my opinion, absolutely. We should have been acquiring them at several times that volume and pushing them out the door as quickly as we can to every citizen. If you can empower the citizen to know their infectious status, that takes a huge burden off of public health to control outbreaks. The citizen can then limit their exposures when they know that they should not be going out. So download responsibility. spread it out evenly, use democracy to its greatest advantage.
All right, just to finish on that, given where we are and the concerns around Omicron, how could the widespread deployment of those tests, let's say over the next couple of weeks, help to mitigate that spread, or at least, mitigate the spread?
Well, if you know that you are infectious, you're not going to go out and socialize with other people and spread the disease further. If you know that someone in a gathering is infectious on that day, you won't be attending that gathering. So we remove one likely source of transmission. It's a layer of protection that will slow transmission. It won't solve the problem outright. It buys us time to solve the problem via vaccination.
All right, Raywat Deonandan, always good to talk to you. Thanks again for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, the fiscal update unveiled yesterday set aside $40 billion to provide compensation and reform of the failed First Nations child welfare system. The money will be used to pay First Nations children who were forced into foster care and family members they were taken from, and to construct a proper child welfare system for First Nations in this country. Marc Miller is Canada's Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations. He is with me now. Minister Miller, good to see you again.
Nice to see you, Peter.
Can you explain precisely how this $40 billion promised in the fiscal update will be spent?
Yeah, well, essentially it is a sum that is divided into two parts. The first part, roughly $20 billion, to deal with compensation for the historic discrimination that children have suffered at the hands of a failed child welfare system that goes back all the way to 1990. Now, it deals with a number of court cases, 3 class action court cases that have popped up since the Prime Minister stood up in 2019 and said he would compensate First Nations children for the harm that they suffered after the decision of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, as well as the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal decision. This is a wide, 3 decades of failure of this system that has caused, in some cases, irreparable harm to First Nations children, as well as their guardians and the discrimination that they suffered at the hands of the same systems. And another category of children that suffered service denials through denial of Jordan's principle, which is a principle of substantive equality between First Nations children and non-Indigenous Canadians across this country. So a broad category of classes that have suffered discrimination, and so $20 billion to repair that harm to the extent money can do so. Right. And then fixing the system, which is really the legacy of this government, the legacy that we need to leave if we want to look at ourselves in the mirror and want to ensure that First Nations children are being treated like my children should be expected to be treated. And that's another $20 billion, roughly over the next 5 years, to fix a broken system, investments into capital, investments into agencies to make sure that First Nations children are treated properly.
So roughly half the money will go toward compensation.
It's roughly half.
Right. The Human Rights Tribunal said that amount should be the maximum allowed, $40,000 per individual. Will the amount be at least that much for each person compensated?
In terms of the First Nations children, these are discussions that are underway, but roughly the answer is yes. We're at a very delicate point in the negotiations, and we need to let those negotiations play out. There are various views around the table, and I won't attempt to categorize them right now, but we have a couple inflection dates, one being December 31st, and then the next, were this to be presented to the courts for a fairness procedure or a procedure of similar nature, that would be in and around the end of March.
What happens if there is no deal by the 31st?
Well, look, the fact that we're still talking, Peter, is a really good sign. We've achieved it in 6 weeks, thanks to the amazing work done by the AFN, Chiefs of Ontario, Anishinaabe Nation, Murray Sinclair, and Dr. Blackstock. We've achieved in 6 weeks what we perhaps could have taken for years in the court adversarial process. So I'm not going to presume the outcome, but I'm hopeful to the extent we are still around the table. And obviously, the commitment in the economic statement reflects how serious we are about fixing the system.
The other half of that $40 billion, you touched on it, is for reform of the First Nations child welfare system, to actually put one that works in place. What should that reform look like?
Well, first and foremost, it's a reform that shouldn't be done from the basement of Indigenous Services Canada. It's one that needs to be done with the parties participating and contributing to the process, and ideally outside a court procedure where Canada is told what to do. We should really be doing this in partnership if we want to live up to what we aspire to do as part of reconciliation. So investments in major capital so that people aren't ripped away from their community and taken into a foreign community, non-Indigenous communities, so they are not immersed in their language and culture. Investments in agencies that need to be topped up insofar as those agencies wouldn't be getting as much money as the equivalent provincial agency, and a number of other measures as it concerns the reform of Jordan's principle and how it's allocated that we're committed to doing as part of a government that really wants to end that discrimination and make sure that no child suffers that going forward. You know, we could have said we're not appealing on day one, compensated everyone with 3 confusing court processes where perhaps the same claimant would have to go through 3 or 4 channels to get properly compensated, and we'd be in court the next day because the discrimination hadn't ended. So we want to end that in one fell swoop in the proper way, and we believe that this process is the right way to do it.
All right, I want to ask you about another subject while you're here. You've been a vocal critic of Bill 21 in your province. You called the school board in West Quebec's decision to remove a teacher from the classroom because she wears a hijab a cowardly act. Why doesn't your government take the Quebec government to court?
Well, first and foremost, and let's put that in context. A lot of people, when we drag a provincial, when we show up in court and we contest a provincial law, or the province shows up and contests a federal law, Quebec is doing that with respect to C-92 and Indigenous children. You don't see the federal government ripping their shirts off, claiming that someone is stepping on our jurisdiction, particularly in the optic of this being one of inherent rights of Indigenous children. When you transpose that argument to Bill 21, you can see some games being played, but the reality is that there are serious constitutional issues with respect to the role of religion and who has that jurisdiction in Canada, the role of equality of men and women under the Charter, who has that jurisdiction, the use of the notwithstanding clause in this context. But first and foremost, you look at the most vulnerable in Quebec and across Canada, and you see this law impacting them first, which is exactly what we saw. Right. There are many people that wear veils in Quebec that suffer verbal assault and some physical assault. So I would propose to you that that's probably the most important thing in a society that holds itself up as protecting minorities and human rights. And that's the problem that I've been saying for a number of years with respect to that discrimination.
You're a lawyer. Why doesn't your government take them to court?
The government, well, clearly, Peter, they are already in court, and as the Prime Minister has already said, we're not excluding the possibility of defending the federal government's position with respect to this law, which we find discriminatory.
Right. Well, so Mr. Singh, the NDP leader, is out yesterday and today saying that there should be no entertaining the possibility. The government should say right now, if this gets to a federal court system, the federal government will challenge it.
Well, I'm not a member of Mr. Singh's party.
No. Okay. Well, should your government take that same position? Would you like to say right now, if it gets to a federal court, we'll challenge it?
Our government's position is that we will stand up for the rights of Canadians and stand up for the Charter. That should be as clear for anyone that's listening to this.
Oh, we'll have to leave it at that. Marc Miller, good to talk to you as always. Take care.
Thank you, Peter.
Bye now. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen from all of us here at CPAC. Thanks for watching. Until next time.